just coughing, not talking. And I already messed up the photo order, even though we were here yesterday talking about it. But I can start out, and once poor Mike, he has to not only video this talk, but he has to run the slides also.
So bear with me.
Yeah, he's got it all. So if you can go to that photo, that new photo of the park mound that's in color that I took. But this research started a long time back during COVID. And I guess I'd always had a little question niggling in my mind. I used to take my children to the park all the time. What was that crazy raised triangle for? And I talked to Diane People about it, and she said, well, when we were kids, we had all kinds of theories. We thought maybe there were dead bodies buried in there. No. But it overlooks the playground area now, and it's backed by the gravel walking path through the park. Did it once have a statue on it? I don't know. But eventually, I found the answer to the triangle mystery, along with a lot of Russell Park history as well. First, Russell Park and much of Jefferson and Greene County was a swamp, or in today's terminology, a wetland. And pessimists in the 1800s wrote to the newspapers and said, nothing is going to be made out of that. That's the home of muskrats and the abiding place of bulrushes. And then we go to the dirt road one. You can find that. In the dirt streets nearby, vehicles often got stuck, and that's not it. That one, there you go. And so, you know, all roads in the county were dirt roads, pretty much. So in the newspapers reported that the dirt streets nearby, vehicles regularly got stuck in the mud in the trenches that passed for streets. So it kind of tells you what it was like. Okay, according to S.J. Melson, much of the town was also originally underwater. The lowland south of Madison and Vine Streets was a pond, reaching all the way to 508 South Vine, and that's where John and Karen Bossart's home is now. It was a pond, and they had a 300-foot boardwalk across it, just so you could get across. So in 1896, both Albert Head and J.J. Russell each proposed a donation of land to the city for park purposes, if the city would pay to improve it. So Head offered land he had north and west of town, and Russell offered his land south of town. Town is kind of ends on the square, you know, at that time. So the newspaper, The Souvenir, advised that the city better accept one or the other at once, even though they couldn't afford to improve the land. They suggested getting the land and then holding a city picnic and inviting all the men in town to join in a day's work on the improvements. Well, Russell's proposal won out, and he had bigger plans than a park. We can go to that J.J. Russell one, be next. The other one there, he's younger. It's a more portrait. I think it's right beside that one. No, the other way, I guess. No, well, anyway, doesn't matter. J.J. Russell, his proposal won out, and he had bigger plans than park. In 1900, he circulated a petition because he wanted to open up several new roads and streets in Jefferson. The Souvenir News explained, at present, people living in either the southeast part of town or the southwest part of town, they can't go to visit their friends in the other place. They have to come all the way downtown and go across the square and then go south to try to visit their friends. So in April 1901, J.J. Russell donated 6 acres of his farmland to the city for the purposes of a park. The city council unanimously accepted, and the tract was christened Russell Park. The valuation of the property was $8,000, figuring about 20 lots at $150 each. But Russell died that year before the land was transferred to the city. And I'm going to digress for a few minutes simply because J.J. Russell was such an exceptional person, and my people advised that I go into that, and I didn't know much about him. He really did have a remarkable life. He was born in Massachusetts and left home at age 16, studied law in Illinois. He was still a student when the Civil War broke out. So he quit school and joined up in the very first call for volunteers. He rose to the rank of lieutenant, was with General Sherman in the first attack on Vicksburg, and his regiment lost 117 men in the first few minutes. Survivors of that regiment went on to capture Arkansas Post and later laid siege to Vicksburg and fought at Lookout Mountain. Finally, he was mustered out in 1864, resumed studying, and became a lawyer in 1866. But most of his adult life was spent here in Greene County, and he had other duties too. And there is another photo of him somewhere, but we don't need to get into that too much. He was sent to Washington to settle with the government for swamplands of the state of Iowa, which was successful. And he was elected to the Iowa State Senate in 1872. And if all that wasn't enough, he was one of 5 appointees by President Grant to make a treaty with the Native American Ute people and to select new land for a reservation in Utah. Whew. I mean, he was still a young man after all that. Well, back to my story about Russell Park. So in October of 1901, the City Council passed a resolution not only to drain the park, but the entire south part of the city. An 18-inch main drain was dug by hand from the northwest corner of the park, directly south to what was called the Russell Ravine. The ravine is approximately 1 block south of Russell Park. A branch drain was laid through the park to join the main drain, and the Bee newspaper commented, "In wet years, the new drain will do a heavy business." These drains were all dug by hand, starting in 1901, using a good-sized force of men to try and get the digging done before the ground freezes. Jefferson's Mr. History, James Andrew, later explained that hand digging continued for many years, around here anyway. In the spring, summer, and fall, men could always find a job in the ditch. Many young immigrants found their first jobs digging canals and ditches. You didn't have to know English to be a good worker in the ditch. And many of these were from Scandinavia and Ireland. These early tilers typically lived in tents or small portable shacks next to the ditches. They cooked their own meals, caught frogs, turtles, and fish in the swamp. They also shot ducks, geese, and rabbits for meat. And they were paid by the rods of each ditch each man dug. It took hundreds of men with strong backs to drain our county. Greene County is in the middle of what's called the Prairie Pothole region of Iowa, formed by glaciers eons ago. And I'm sure many of you who are farmers are very familiar with all the tiling that has gone on here. So most of the county was tiled by these human ditch diggers, even after a digging machine was invented. But these machines were difficult, expensive, and not easy to find. Can you find that ditch digging machine? That's it, right there. And that's in Jefferson. And it was on one of the streets downtown, and that big contraption is a steam-powered ditch digging machine. But that was about 1917 when that happened. Okay, now I need to go to a photo of George Henry Gallup, and I'll tell you when you get there. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. There he is, yay! So that's our George Horace Gallup's father. George Henry Gallup was the first Gallup 1864 to 1932, he was a dairy farmer, a land investor, and a realtor. I was amazed that he owned land all the way from Jefferson to Montana, including Jefferson's Lincoln Hotel. He was one of Jefferson's foremost town builders, and he saw to it that his first two sons planted many trees in Russell Park and lining many streets. He didn't want them getting into any trouble, you know. He was a major donor and fundraiser both for the Carnegie Library and the Chautauqua Park land. George Horace Gallup was of the Gallup Poll fame, was Henry's fourth son, George Henry's fourth son. But one of his best projects was to turn Russell Pond into Russell Park. And he had J.J. Russell had the original idea and donated the land, but Gallup made it happen. He hired hand diggers to cut into a ridge of his land that reached from his 8-sided Gallup house to what is now the Dollar Store and Midwest Missions parking lot, the corner of Locust and State Streets. If that means anything to you. And we can go to an old photo of the Gallup house. Oh no, older, black and white. Older, I mean, keep going. There it is, sorry. You can tell how gentle the slope is there. And it was just gently sloped all the way for a few blocks there. But he cut it down, and we can go to the modern one that I took where it's cut off, that one. Now, you can tell he cut off the ridge, and there are steps now, it's quite steep. The plan was, okay, I already said some of this, but anyway, the work contract was let to William Nelson in December of 1901, and it was so odd. Later, they were draining Russell Park, but they were also draining the entire south part of town. And according to the late city engineer, John Milligan, they put everything in the ground to help build it up. And a lot of old rusted car bodies and junk are found underneath South Chestnut Street, other streets, underneath houses, everywhere in that part of town. Anything and everything. An Omaha landscape gardener, Mr. Carpenter, designed and helped execute plans for the park. He was an advocate of forest trees and of land contouring. He predicted that 1 year would show a great change for the better. And there was considerable discussion of placing the new Carnegie Library and a small lake in Russell Park. But J.J. Russell's will, he'd already died, remember? His will didn't allow for a library. So to show visitors what an up-and-coming town we were, it was decided to put the library nearer to the courthouse square. No lake was dug in Russell Park. I mean, who would want to dig a pond in a lake in an area where you could just drain it, you know? But by 1903, funding and street work had already cost $2,800, with only $750 contributed by public funds. George Gallup donated $1,100, and a Mr. Turrell and Lovejoy provided $450. So, private citizens were asked to donate money to build sidewalks, drives, and to plant trees. Our city was pretty much broke at the time, so we needed people to donate. Okay, you can go to a mower. There's a big old mowing machine pulled by a horse, if you can find it. Meanwhile, George Gallup had a crown contract, and that's way too small. You can enlarge that. George Gallup had a contract to plow and cultivate the entire surface of the park by the end of April 1903. It was mown under the watchful care of Sprague Shannon, the man behind the big mower. And the Bee reported that in 1907 that it was all he could do to keep the grass down on this big tract working steadily. It's really not known what type of mower he used, but most large mowers at this time were horse-drawn, with the operator sitting on the machine or walking behind it.
I lost it all, Mickey.
Well, Bob's there. He came along just in case. He's my tech support, you know. I have my in-house counsel tech support. So,
We lost it on the screen. Yeah.
we'll get there. At any rate, the next photo will be a very early photo of Russell Park, taken from the southeast corner before the tennis courts were built. And the trees are all about, 4 or 5 feet high. That's it. And we'll get there eventually. Okay, so now we need to get to that
Now, go to the other one, we should be able to go earlier.
early photo.
Watch your feet there.
Okay, whoop, go back a couple. Go back, there, this one.
Okay.
That's from the southeast corner. So that'd be like, for those of you who grew up here, like where Dr. Marshall lived, on that corner, the southeast